The blade passes through the air and nothing happens. There are no sparks, no excessive noise, no choreographed duel like in the movies. There is only one precise, silent, quick cut, and the opponent falls before even understanding the move. Because in real life, true sword masters didn't fight like Hollywood portrays. They didn't spin their blades in the air. They didn't leap at the enemy. They didn't clash swords for endless minutes. They used practical, brutal, and efficient techniques. Short blows, deadly thrusts, cuts impossible to see coming. Today, we will reveal the real sword techniques that Hollywood lied to you about. Hollywood has transformed sword fighting into a spectacle of endless acrobatics and choreography. But behind the screen, the truth is much darker and much simpler. In real life, sword duels didn't last minutes. It lasted seconds. Knights, samurai, mercenaries, Vikings, desert warriors, and European fencing masters didn't train to exchange blows like in movies. They trained to attack first, land the first strike, and finish immediately. In historical treaties from Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Middle East, the rule was always the same: win fast or die fast. Hollywood shows swords clashing all the time, as if it were inevitable. In reality, no skilled warrior wanted to clash blade against blade. This would destroy the weapon, create a risk of breakage, and leave you vulnerable. The real battle consisted of direct thrusts, aimed at the base, short and unexpected cuts, strikes with the pommel and the guard, grabs, elbows, and knees, blade jams followed by pushes, half-sword techniques for piercing armor, targeted cuts to the hand, the easiest and most deadly target. Most victims of a real duel never saw the entire blade, just the tip. This video will shatter the myths created by cinema and reveal the authentic techniques used by real warriors. Fast, efficient, and extremely dangerous. From the fencing of German masters in the 1400s to the strategies of the samurai, from the tricks of Renaissance duelists to the brutal techniques of the battlefield, nothing that Hollywood shows comes close to the truth. You'll never see a sword fight the same way again. If you enjoy true history, forgotten combat techniques, and weapons that Hollywood never quite understood, subscribe to Blades and Shadows. Leave a like and comment which myth you want to see debunked in the next episode. Your participation helps the channel grow and bring more truth behind the blades. If there's one universal mistake Hollywood makes in virtually every combat movie, it's the idea that swords should clash repeatedly, producing sparks, constant metallic noise, and long duels like dance choreography. But for any real warrior of the Middle Ages or the Renaissance period, this practice would be considered madness and suicide. The steel used in the blades was precious, expensive, and relatively fragile upon lateral impact, 2 or 3 strong blows, and the sword could chip, bend, or even break in half. Therefore, historical masters left clear instructions. Don't block with the blade, block with the guard. This technique was called parry with the cross, and it was used in German and Italian fencing schools. The idea was simple. When the opponent attacked, the warrior would tilt the handle and use the cross guard, the horizontal piece between the handle and the blade, to absorb the impact. The guard functioned as a mechanical lock, sturdy and made precisely for that purpose. The blade remained intact. The coup continued smoothly, and the counterattack came immediately. Accounts from the treatises of Johannes Lichtenauer and Fiore de' Liberi reveal what Hollywood never shows. The real duel wasn't a symphony of steel against steel. It was a game of silence and intention. A single well-placed strike was enough to break through the opponent's guard, and the experienced fighter would immediately respond with a thrust to the face, a cut on the hand, or a shove to unbalance the opponent. Real sword fighting was more about technique, psychological pressure, and economy of movement than about noise. The myth of clash, clash, clash never existed. What existed was efficiency, and a guard used as a weapon. If Hollywood had to show how real fights happened, its characters would die in 3 seconds, because the most frequently attacked target in historical fencing was neither the chest nor the head. It was the hand. Yes, the hand. It may seem anticlimactic for the movies, but in the real world, hitting your opponent's hand was the quickest, safest, and most efficient way to win a duel. And this applied to medieval knights, Japanese samurai, Renaissance duelists, and even warriors from the Middle East. The treatises on combat make this clear. Fiore de' Liberi, a 15th century Italian master, describes dozens of techniques focused exclusively on cutting or piercing the hand holding the sword. Hans Talhofer, a German master, repeats the same principle. Whoever lands the punch wins the duel. And why? Because a severed hand equals a weapon on the ground. Weapon on the ground. Combat over. Simple. Quickly. Ruthless. The warriors knew that hitting the tree trunk was risky. More distance, more movement, more chance of missing. The hand, on the other hand, was always exposed. Every attack, every defense, every attempt to block the blade placed the hand in front of the body. In practice, the duel went like this. The opponent was advancing. His hand crossed the line of sight. The experienced swordsman would make a short, direct, precise strike. The opponent would drop the sword instantly. End of the fight. There was no cinematic heroism. There were no 4 minutes of choreographed sparks. There was only one decision to make: to take the weapon from the enemy as quickly as possible. This is the technique that Hollywood never shows, because it would ruin the entire choreography. In movies, warriors spin their swords above their heads, make wide turns, and advance with sweeping blows that resemble dance choreography. It looks good on screen, but in real life, these movements were considered extremely dangerous, and not for lack of strength, but for lack of logic. European and Japanese treatise writers repeat the same principle. Long punches create deadly openings. By raising your sword too high, you expose your ribs, armpits, hands, shoulders, and even your head. When you spin the blade, you lose your balance and shift your center of gravity. By taking long strides, you lose your balance and become an easy target for a direct punch to the face. Therefore, actual combat was dominated by short, almost invisible blows to the modern spectator. The German masters called these actions discontinue, Zwerchhau, Krumpfhau, compact, direct movements immediately followed by another technique. In Japan, the samurai called this Kiritsuke Anjhomen Giri Kuta, short, quick cuts with minimal movement designed to hit vital points without opening up counterattack opportunities. A real sword strike would go like this. The blade moved only a few centimeters. The cut occurred before the opponent realized the intention. The attack ended exactly where it began, without losing composure. The attacker was already prepared to strike again. Medieval chroniclers describe battles decided in 2 or 3 moves, never in 20 or 30 as we see in movies. Shortcuts killed more people. They were unpredictable, fast, and impossible to block in time. While Hollywood showcases aerial strikes and circular movements, historical fencing reveals something far more terrifying: surgical precision with minimal effort. The spectacle remained in the films. Efficiency remained in the combat manuals. In movies, 2 warriors lock swords, face each other, push against one another, exert force for several seconds, as if the fight were an arm wrestling contest with blades. This never happened in, reality. What Hollywood portrays as a moment of tension would be, for a real swordsman, the perfect opportunity to kill. In fencing manuals from the 14th to the 16th centuries, blocking and trapping the enemy's blade did not mean standing still and pushing. It meant entering the grapple, the close quarters combat phase where elbows, knees, throws, and strikes with the guard were not only allowed, but recommended. The weapon ceased to be the focus. The body became the deadly weapon. The technique is called wrestling with the sword, grappling with a sword, taught by masters such as Talhofer, Ringeck, and Cal. The goal was simple. When the blade jammed, you couldn't push. You was advancing. The actual sequence was brutal and fast-paced. Momentary locking of the blades, body movement into the opponent's guard, a blow with the pommel to the mouth, nose, or temple, an elbow strike to the jaw or throat, a knee to the stomach or groin, finishing with a short thrust inches from the enemy's body. A real duel was being decided in those seconds of chaos. While fiction depicts brute force, real combat used biomechanics, leverage, and body contact. What Hollywood calls a dramatic lock-in, historical fencing called an execution window. And that is why no real fight featured long sword thrusts. Whoever did it first would die first. Hollywood loves to show 2 fighters walking in circles, calmly measuring distance, analyzing their opponent as if they were thinking about their next line of dialogue. But in reality, fighting while standing still was a death sentence. European fencing masters called this being dead on your feet. Samurai called it tsutemi, the idea that hesitation and rigidity could cost one's life even before the first blow. And the Arab treaties of the Crusader period reinforced the same principle. A sword is useless without feet. Movement was not about aesthetics. It was about survival. The true swordsman did not walk in circles. He moved in and out, advanced and retreated, slid sideways, changed angles, feigned posture, shifted his line, sought an opening, and explored every inch of terrain. The manuals describe sequences like this: short step forward, direct lunge, minimal retreat to avoid enemy strike, lateral step to break the attack line, sudden lunge to cut off the outstretched hand, diagonal movement to catch the opponent from the side. All of this happened in less than a second. Therefore, real duels seemed confusing to observers. Fast-paced, unbalanced, full of micro-movements. None of that rigid and elegant choreography that cinema popularized. A real combat scenario involved. Constant displacement, distance reading, sudden changes in speed, posture traps, unexpected advances, subtle retreats that opened up counterattacks, and above all, attack the moment the enemy makes a wrong move. Hollywood makes everything look symmetrical and beautiful, but real life rewards those who move in an irregular, uncomfortable, unpredictable way. The dance in cinema is smooth. The royal dance was chaotic. Whoever stopped, died. If there's one image that Hollywood repeats in almost every sword movie, it's this. The hero delivers a dramatic blow to the enemy's chest, piercing the heart with a single perfect movement. From a cinematic point of view, it's beautiful. Historically, it almost never happened. The chest is the most difficult area to penetrate in real combat, even without heavy armor. Padded clothing, jerkins, stiff leather, ribs, and muscles make penetration difficult. Against metal mesh, then, it is practically impossible without specialized techniques. That's why real warriors targeted regions that Hollywood rarely shows. 1. Armpit, the deadliest spot of the Middle Ages. The treaties referred to them as door of life. Almost without protection, full of blood vessels and vital for breathing. One stab there would kill in minutes. 2. Neck, where most duels were decided. The blade needed only a few centimeters to reach vital arteries. Fast, discreet, efficient. 3. Face and eye, the favorite target of German masters. Fiore de Liberi and Lichtenauer clearly stated, "Whoever controls the facial expressions controls the fight." A stab in the eye would end any fight. 4. Inner thigh, a silent and lethal strike. The femoral artery was a deadly target. It was common in close quarters combat. 5. Low coastal area, specialized Japanese strike. Samurai trained to enter between the lower ribs, and reach internal organs with minimal resistance. Why doesn't Hollywood show this? Because it's ugly, because it's fast, because it's too real, and because there isn't time to create a grand dramatic scene. In real life, warriors didn't seek the epic blow. They were looking for the best possible strike, and that strike was almost always aimed at vulnerable points, not the chest. A real duel was decided by millimeters, not by cinematic movements. Hollywood insists on showing warriors raising their swords above their heads, preparing a large downward arc, and delivering a powerful blow that splits the enemy in two. It's beautiful. It's dramatic. That's completely false. Historical warriors almost never used wide vertical cuts, and there were 3 clear reasons for this. 1. Raising the sword exposes your entire body. When you raise the blade above your head, your armpit is open, your guard disappears, your hand is exposed, your posture weakens. Its center of gravity rises. In other words, you become a perfect target for a stab to the face or chest. No royal swordsman would take that position unless it was absolutely necessary. 2. Downward cuts are slow and predictable. The coup comes from above. It comes in a straight line, and any opponent with minimal training can, to avoid by tilting the body, block with the guard, to get under the blow and stab you. Simply get out of the line of attack. Attacking from above is the easiest way to telegraph exactly what royal warriors avoided. 3. A sword is not an axe. Many swords had thin, flexible blades designed for side slashing and thrusting. Using them as an axe could break the thread, to bend the metal, to lock the blade into bones, leaving you vulnerable while trying to pull you away. True combat prioritized efficiency, not brute force. So how did warriors actually attack? With horizontal cuts, short diagonals, and quick thrusts. Low amplitude movements. Coups that required minimal effort, maximum speed, zero unnecessary opening. Samurai, European knights, Italian duelists. They all had something in common. Cutting from top to bottom was the last resort, not the first. How many times does Hollywood show warriors leaping to deliver an epic blow? Acrobatic leaps, spinning attacks in the air, moves that look like circus choreography. In historical practice, this would only have one result: instant death. Real warriors, Europeans, Japanese, Arabs, Persians, Vikings, knew a basic principle that Hollywood completely ignores. Whoever loses touch with reality loses the fight. 1. Jumping throws off your balance. The foundation of all blade combat is balance. In the jump, you lose. Stability, control, ability to block, direction of fall, possibility of retreating. An experienced opponent would simply wait for you to return to the ground and attack before you regained your stance. 2. Telegraphic leaps. Certain death. When you jump, the movement is great. The intention is obvious. The coup is predictable. The opponent has time to react. And worse, you are completely vulnerable to a simple direct thrust while you are suspended. Fencing schools call this a doomed move. 3. Jumping increases strength against yourself. There's a detail that Hollywood never shows. The harder the strike during the jump, the more likely your own blade is to get stuck in the target or deflect. And what if you're trying to retrieve the weapon mid-air? The enemy only needs to stab you in the chest or face. 4. The treaties are clear. Keep your feet on the ground. German and Italian masters repeat, don't let go of the ground or you will lose your life. Samurai reinforce, a sword without a base is a dead sword. And Arabic treaties describe, the man who rises high gives his heart to the enemy. How did warriors actually attack? With bursts of horizontal movement that are low, fast, and precise, short steps, diagonal displacements, quick dives, closed angle cuts, shoulder and hip attacks, advances with body weight. Their feet were always ready to react. Hollywood shows leaps. History shows efficiency. Hollywood loves to show the hero striking the enemy's sword with such force that it flies away, spinning in the air as if in a magic show. In real life, this doesn't work. It didn't happen, and it wasn't even attempted by trained warriors. Disarming an opponent with a sword was not a pretty thing to do. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal, and it almost always involved hurting the enemy first. 1. You don't make someone's trained sword fly. A person who knows how to fight holds the weapon firmly, with the weight distributed across the body. If you try to hit the blade hard, you open up, you lose your balance, you expose your hand, you surrender your custody, you might break your own sword. No one who understood combat would attempt that. 2. The real disarming method was done by striking the hand. The number one disarming technique was the same one that decided duels for centuries: a cut or thrust to the hand holding the sword. Fiore de Liberi, Ringek, Talhofer, Lichtenauer all reinforce this. Disarming is done by cutting off the limb, not the sword. Upon reaching the hand, the enemy loses strength. To arm horses, the fight ends. Simple, cruel, effective. 3. Another common technique, twisting the blade at close range. When the swords clashed, the experienced swordsman would advance his body, place his guard under the enemy's blade, and twist with leverage. A well-applied twist dislocates the opponent's wrist, makes the gun slip, causes instant pain, opens the door for a fatal thrust. No spinning in the air, no dramatic scenes. The weapon simply slips because the pain is unbearable. 4. The final disarm, grab the wrist. In close combat, warriors would momentarily drop their sword with one hand, grab their opponent's wrist, and use the other hand to thrust. It was so fast that most of the witnesses didn't see the transition. The cinema hides it because it's too ugly. Disarming wasn't stylish, it wasn't clean, it wasn't heroic, it was practical. And more often than not, it involved destroying the enemy's hand, wrist, or joint before delivering the final blow. The actual combat was less of a spectacle and more survival. If there's one thing Hollywood needs to tell a good story, It's time. Time for dramatic tension. Time for dialogue. Time for sparks, choreography, and blows exchanged in the same rhythm of a dance. But none of that exists in real combat. Historical duels, European, Japanese, Arab, Viking, Persian, rarely lasted more than a few seconds. And when they lasted half a minute, they were already considered exceptionally long. Why were they so short? 1. The first mistake is often the last. Real warriors were not equal in skill as we see in the movies. A small mistake by posture, distance time, blade angle, foot, positioning, that was enough to end the fight immediately. A real duel didn't offer second chances. 2. Sharp weapons do not allow for prolonged exchanges of blows. Real swords are truly sharp and piercing. A single clean contact, hand, arm, throat, face, can incapacitate or kill. There was no way to continue fighting with severed finger, ruptured tendon, arterial hemorrhage, deep drilling. In movies, characters fight while bleeding buckets. In reality, this is biologically impossible. 3. Warriors trained to decide everything in the first move. European treaties refer to this as vor and knock. Before act first, after react with immediate death. The fight was about taking the initiative, surprising, controlling the distance, and finishing. There was no such thing as roundo 2. 4. The actual terrain doesn't allow for choreography. Alleyways, taverns, forests, staircases, corridors, uneven fields, none of these scenarios allow for acrobatics or lengthy exchanges. Royal duels ended like this: fast forward, closing the distance, short strike, death, escape, or surrender. Often, those who died didn't even understand where the blow came from. 5. Real adrenaline destroys any long fight. Have you tried running at maximum speed for 10 seconds? The body explodes with adrenaline. Now imagine that with the fear of dying. Fatigue, loss of precision, muscle tremors, all of this happens in an instant. Therefore, in real life, warriors engaged in quick, purposeful, and aggressive battles. No poetic duels with choreography. Hollywood sells fantasy. History shows efficiency. In Hollywood, the fight is simple: sword against sword. The blade is the only tool. The duel is pure. But the real warriors didn't have that kind of romanticism. They didn't believe in cinematic honor. They believed in living or dying. Therefore, in a real fight, the sword was rarely the only weapon used. In fact, the masters of the Middle Ages and Japan treated the sword as only one part of a much more complete arsenal. 1. The guard was used like an iron fist. The metal piece that separates the handle from the blade, the cross guard, was a brutal weapon. With it, the swordsman could broken teeth, to smash the nose, to hit the temple, break the eyebrow, stop the enemy's attack with pain. In German textbooks, this appears as murder, the murderous coup. 2. The pommel of the sword was a weapon of impact. Striking with the pommel was one of the quickest methods to finish close-range combat. A well-executed scam, disoriented, it broke cartilage, it caused concussion, creating space for a fatal thrust. Hollywood rarely shows this because it's not glamorous, but it used to be extremely common. 3. The shield was more lethal than the sword. When used, the shield, especially the round one, was an offensive weapon. Sharp edges could cut. Impact blows broke bones. Shoves brought down the enemy. The angles completely protected the body movies treat. Shields as defense. In history, they were tools of aggression. 4. Hands were an essential part of combat. Warriors grabbed, pushed, twisted, and threw each other off balance. The actual combat included grabs on the arms, wrist sprains, projections, elbow strikes, strangulations, intentional falls to finish on the ground. Sword fighting was half blade, half wrestling. 5. Terrain and objects became improvised weapons. Sand in my eyes, a cover to block vision, belt to restrain the arm. Chair, stone, bench, everything was a weapon. The idea of a clean duel only exists in the movies. The real rule was simple: use everything. Real warriors didn't fight theatrically. They fought with instinct, technique, and opportunity. The sword was important, but it wasn't the main focus. It was just a tool within a toolbox of violent solutions. Hollywood never shows this. because it would destroy all the elegance of the choreography. The Hollywood idea of two warriors facing each other, alone in an empty field, dramatically illuminated by the moon or fire, is pure fantasy. In real life, isolated fights were extremely rare and extremely short. Most of the fights took place in environments with multiple combatants, constant interference, and the risk of attacks from behind. Fencing manuals make this clear without even needing to say it explicitly. All techniques were created to end a fight before another one could begin, because warriors knew that if you spend too much time with an opponent, the next one will come and kill you from behind. 1. The real battlefield was chaos, not theater. Hollywood portrays polite soldiers waiting their turn. The reality was shoves, stomps, weapons moving through crowds, blinding dust, bodies lying on the ground, allies and enemies mingling. Nobody had the luxury of a clean duel. 2. In ambushes, you never faced just one. In alleys, roads, taverns, camps, forests, attacks were carried out by groups. Even noble knights fought rarely. Alone. They had squires, archers, lancers, support men. A long duel was simply impossible without someone interfering. 3. Warriors trained to finish as quickly as possible. This is the brutalist truth that Hollywood is hiding. Treaties don't teach you how to win a long duel. They teach how to end a fight before another one begins. This leads to the more aggressive techniques. Stab in the face, cut on the hand, direct diagonal attack on the armpit, blade locking followed by immediate thrust, throwing the opponent to the ground to execute safely. All of this exists for a reason. Eliminate the enemy in seconds. 4. One-on-one combat only existed in formal duels. And even so, they had rules, they had judges, they had witnesses, they had prohibited techniques, they had legal purposes. Movies treat any confrontation as a formal duel, but that's fantasy. The real world was wild, unpredictable, and full of variables. The truth that Hollywood doesn't show. Historical. Warriors did not train for poetic duels. They trained so they wouldn't die while they were occupied with another enemy. Therefore, the actual techniques were direct, lethal, and economical. The exact opposite of cinematic choreography. The real fight was no ballet. It was a race against time. Hollywood loves to show a warrior getting cut on the shoulder, back, or arm, and continuing to fight as if nothing happened. Sometimes, the hero takes 3, 4, 5 cuts and still wins the fight. 9. Real life. That's impossible. Swords, European, Japanese, Arab, Chinese, were weapons of war. They were created with one purpose, to incapacitate with the first clean strike. There were no human tanks in medieval combat. Let's look at the anatomical and historical reality. 1. A cut on the shoulder tears essential muscles. The shoulder controls all arm movement. A blade piercing the area could cut the deltoid, rupture of the clavicle tendons, to pierce the scapula, open the trapeze, to hit nerves that control the arm. Direct result, the fighter instantly loses the use of his arm. There is no such thing as continuing to fight with this injury. 2. A cut on the forearm immediately eliminates the ability to hold a weapon. The treaties talk about it all the time. That's why hand-to-hand combat was so common. A blow to the forearm cuts tendons, breaks grip muscles, destroys the ability to wield the sword, causes immediate debilitating pain to arm horses. The duel ends. Simple and brutally efficient. 3. Backstabs are not superficial. The back protects the spine, but it doesn't function as natural armor. A clean backstab can puncture lung, break ribs, to go through the kidney, tearing spinal muscles, to hit the spine. Even with a shallower cut, the pain and bleeding would knock the fighter down in seconds. 4. A deep cut to the thigh is lethal within minutes. The femoral artery is one of the most dangerous arteries in the body. Any cut in it causes such rapid bleeding that without immediate help, impossible at the time, the wrestler would collapse almost instantly. That's why he was a common target. 5. Real adrenaline does not turn someone into a superhero. Unlike in the movies, pain paralyzes. Bleeding reduces strength and balance. The clash prevents any coordinated action. Warriors did not ignore blows. They were falling. The raw truth. The first clean wound usually decided everything. Warriors did not continue fighting with multiple deep cuts. The actual fight was short not only because of technique, but because the human body can't handle what Hollywood portrays. Cinema creates superhuman resilience. History reveals human frailty. If Hollywood were real, knights and samurai would be among the most idiotic people in history, spending fortunes on armor that can be destroyed with a single theatrical sword stroke. The truth is exactly the opposite. Medieval armor was advanced technology, handcrafted, and extremely durable, and swords were not made to pierce it. Never. No culture has done this. No technique taught that. If you tried to attack the armor directly with the blade, 3 things would happen. A sword lascaria, I would lose the thread, or it would bend. That's why real warriors did something completely different from what Hollywood portrays. 1. Against plate armor, a half-sword was used. German masters called it half-sword. It was like this. The swordsman held the blade with one hand. He transformed the sword into a short spear. It was targeting gaps in the armor, not the plates. The real targets were armpit, visor du elmo, base of the neck, back of the knee, groin never on a metal plate. 2. Against chainmail, swords could not cut. Chainmail was extraordinarily effective against cuts. Therefore, warriors used punches with reinforced tip, impact blows with a knob, shoves to knock down, mercy daggers for piercing flexible points. Hollywood shows blades cutting through mesh like fabric. That's pure fiction. 3. Against hardened leather, the problem was lateral force. Boiled leather. The boiled leather European. It was rigid and absorbed cuts. The sword struck and slipped. Therefore, warriors preferred spears, axes, warhammers, apples, weapons designed to crush, not cut. 4. Armor existed precisely because it worked. On the battlefield, they protect against arrows, absorb cuts, they deflect stabs, they prevent internal damage, they prevent deep bleeding. Hollywood turns knights into aluminum cans. Medieval reality turned them into human tanks. 5. The clever swordsman never wasted his blade. The royal technique stated, keep the meat blade handy. Use the weight of the sword against the metal, i.e., blade, vulnerable parts, guard, knob, quillons, battery armor. And what happened when the enemy fell? Then came the final weapon, mercy, the dagger used to pierce the breaches. Hollywood creates the illusion that brute force conquers all. History shows that intelligence and precision have always triumphed over brute force. Hollywood presents the sword as an instrument of cinematic precision. A perfect strike, a clean cut, an enemy falling in slow motion. But historical truth is far less elegant and far more brutal. In real life, sword strikes weren't clean, they weren't predictable, and they rarely looked like a straight line as we see in movies. The sword was a tool that interacted with muscles, bones, clothing, leather, sweat, mud, blood, and chaos. And each blow produced a different result. The warriors knew this. Therefore, they trained not to make perfect cuts, but to adapt to what happened after the impact. 1. Cuts stopped at the bone, and that changed everything. Side blows often struck the ribs, collarbones, jaw, and shoulder blade. It locked the blade. It restrained the movement. He ripped the handle from his hands, moved his arm. It created dangerous openings. That's why the manuals emphasize short thrusts. They don't jam. 2. Thick clothing was devastating to the blade. Doublets, heavy tunics, cloaks, furs, and mantles. They absorbed impact, made cuts difficult. They wrapped around the blade. They pulled the sword down. A real fight was full of friction, not choreographed fluidity. 3. Blood, sweat, and mud made the sword slippery. What Hollywood ignores makes real combat far more dangerous. The sword would often slip, both in the attacker's hand and on the enemy's body. That is why so many teachers taught, hold on tight but don't grip too forcefully. It was technique, not strength. 4. Cuts were rarely fatal at the time. Unlike in the movies, hundreds of accounts show blows that cut through muscles but didn't kill, cuts that severed arms but did not immediately bring down the warrior, deep wounds that did not bleed immediately, impacts that stunned but did not bring down. Therefore, the warriors followed up with movements aimed at immediate finishing. 5. The real finishing blow was almost always a short thrust. Despite the reputation of the cuts, the blow that ended the fight was a stab in the face, a stab in the armpit, a stab in the neck, or a thrust in the groin. Quick, precise, deadly. Nothing compares to the dramatic poetry that cinema loves. The ultimate truth. A sword was not an instrument of cinematic honor. It was a survival tool in a ruthless world, and its effectiveness depended less on strength and beauty, and more on technique, anatomy, and brutality. Hollywood sells fantasy. History delivers a harsh reality. If you enjoyed discovering the real and brutal side of sword fighting, leave a like, subscribe to Blades and Shadows, and comment which myth you want to see debunked in the next episode. Your support helps this channel continue revealing the truths that Hollywood will never show.